Over the last 2 months, Sweat Elite spent time in Japan, filming a video series leading up to one of the most watched running events in the world, Hakone Ekiden. Now, in this video, I'm going to share with you what that experience was like, what it was like to shoot the series of videos leading up to Ekiden, and also trying to film race day itself, which was a huge challenge. I'm just recently finished up on the project. I'm now here in Portugal, and this was an experience of a lifetime for me, and a huge challenge that I wanted to personally take up to do something a little bit different on our YouTube channel over at Sweat Elite. So I'd been really curious about Ekiden for many years. I would say probably even over a decade. I'd heard the word and I knew roughly what it was. I knew it was a road relay. Station to station is the exact term in Japanese, but I didn't really know exactly how the whole event worked, why it was so popular in Japan. And when I learned that there was 60 to 70 million people tuning into the event every single year, I thought to myself, I have to get over there and figure out how this all works and showcase at least everything that I possibly can to the rest of the world that understand the English language, because in Japan there's not a lot of English spoken, and most of the coverage that's available and reporting that's available, in fact more or less all of it, is in Japanese language. So for us that don't understand Japanese in the US and Australia and UK and other parts of Europe, it's very hard to follow, obviously. So I decided in August, after connecting with Sebastian from Tempo Japan, who does have, his nationality is part Japanese, that I would invest 2 months of my life, more or less all of November and December 2023, to try and showcase as much as we possibly can of the build up to Ekiden. So before I go into that, I'll quickly touch over what exactly Ekiden is. It was explained in more detail in the first video of this series that we put together. But Ekiden is basically 2 large events that take place in the first week in January. There's a corporate Ekiden race called New Year Ekiden that happens on the 1st of January. And then there's a university Ekiden race called Hakone Ekiden that happens on the 2nd and 3rd of January. And they're slightly different in how they work. Now, the bigger event that more or less everyone knows, well, in Japan they know both events, but the bigger event globally is the Hakone Ekiden, the university event. And I'll be honest, before I went to Japan, I actually thought the corporate scene was a little bit bigger, but turns out, I believe a university event is a little bit more popular, at least within Japan, for viewers from the TV channel. So I wanted to understand what made the event super popular and how the event actually worked. So these 2 events basically started about 100 years ago. And that while they gained quite a lot of popularity through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, it was in the 80s that it really started to take off, with a TV network called Nippon TV deciding to broadcast it live on Japanese TV. I guess just as sort of televisions were becoming very mainstream and more people had them in their homes in the 80s, especially through the 90s. It was sort of perfect timing from Nippon to come in, decide to broadcast this event. The individual that actually decided to put effort into broadcasting it on the television was actually an ex-Ekiden competitor. He was very passionate about the event and thought it would be really popular if they put it on their TV channel. Now it becomes one of the most popular sporting events to watch in Japan every single year. And you really could sort of draw parallels to the Super Bowl in the US as to the amount of people as a percentage in the country that actually tune in and watch the event. It's around about 30 to 45% estimated, somewhere around the 50 to 75 million mark. I've heard different numbers here and there, but it's somewhere around that. That is enormous, not to mention the amount of people that are trying to watch it from overseas via VPNs and whatnot. But it was in the 80s that this event's popularity really took off as it was put on television. And from my understanding, more or less what happened after that, and of course I'm not completely experienced in the history of Ekiden, and only people that understand the Japanese language completely would be able to properly understand the history. But there was a series of events that occurred through the 80s that basically led for it to be on television. And then a lot of the kids out of high school really decided to place their effort in to try to qualify for their university Ekiden team to try and qualify for Hakone Ekiden, the event that happens on the 2nd and 3rd of January. So what are these 2 events and how do they work? So let's focus in on Hakone Ekiden in this video, with the corporate event happening on the 1st of January. Hakone is on the 2nd and 3rd. This is a 217 kilometer race going over 2 days. And the first day, it's 5 runners that basically do a road relay one-way direction from Tokyo down to Hakone, and they all run around about 20 to 21.5 kilometers, give or take a little bit. The legs are all slightly different. They're all around about that half marathon distance, and they also have to pass a sachet, almost like a baton, which you can see on many of the runners around their sort of chest and back in this video. They have to pass the baton inside a certain zone to the next runner, as the runner then exchanges and carries on to try and take the sash or the baton to the next leg. So on the first day, Hakone Ekiden, it's about 107 to 109 kilometers one-way direction. And then in the second day, they start again and come back to Tokyo with 5 new runners. So each team has 10 runners, 5 on the first day and 5 on the second day, each runner running around about a half marathon distance for a total of 217 kilometers, returning to Tokyo on January the 3rd. So, how did this event really, how does it work? How does it become as popular as it has? My understanding is, as mentioned, the TV network really boosted the image of this event by making the coverage absolutely 5-star, even from very early on in the late 80s and the late 90s. And as a result, many universities place huge importance on this event and trying to qualify for the event. And then, over time, it just built up to be this enormous beast of a running event. And nowadays, as mentioned, it can really be sort of compared to the Super Bowl. I think I'd like to draw more parallels internally to the NCAA, in that in the States, in the US, kids out of high school really want to try and qualify for, or be recruited to a university so that they can be on the big screen at the NCAA championships, which is basically the national championships for university students in the US. So scholarships are provided. Athletes are often provided with some sort of minimal funding in order to recruit them to the university. Internally, it works very similar in Japan, in that athletes are really trying to qualify for their Hakone Ekiden team so that they can compete in the Hakone Ekiden event that happens on the 2nd and 3rd for their university. This is such a deep cultural thing and such a pride and joy of Japan that really can't be probably put into words by someone in English, because I believe that there is just so much ingrained culture and history to this event. Wish there was 5 or 10 more words I could use like that would explain it more thoroughly, but I think that you can see the point. There's just such an internal motivation from these kids, especially every year after they watch the event, and it's sort of ingrained in their memory, and they really strive towards trying to put themselves in the position of being on TV in future years at Hakone Ekiden. So the epicenter and the core really revolves around qualifying yourself for that university's team. And as a result of that, of course, you need to be quite good in high school in order to be recruited to the Hakone Ekiden University team. And so as a result, kids, become really interested and really focused in on the sport of running at a very young age, around about 10 to 13. And there's so much drive from high schools to recruit very good coaches and very good programs in order to have athletes good enough to then qualify for a scholarship to the universities. So there's also Ekiden events in high school as well, because at the end of the day, Ekiden is not a name of an event, it's actually a style of race. It's a road relay station to station in one direction, although I do understand there's other events around the world that are not in one direction, but I believe the official term is supposed to be like that. And so I often hear people ask the question as to why isn't there Ekiden events around the world? Well, there actually is. There's very small ones sort of all over the world. In fact, I competed in an Ekiden style event last year that was a very social for fun event in Europe, nothing like the Hakone Ekiden or the corporate Ekiden. It was very almost ruleless and just a lot of fun, and at the end of the day there was minimal prize and there was no TV network. But I think a lot of people try and think about understanding why there's not an international road relay like this. I think it's much harder than most people realize to pull something like this off. And I also believe that once you're out of university, you treat your career in running as a job, and all of a sudden it switches over from being sort of more of a fun thing and something you do as a hobby, which you do in university, to something you want to make money from and a career from, because your alternative when you come out of university is working in a full-time job, right? And so I think as a result of that, it's very hard to be able to come up with the sort of right incentive and business model to incentivize professional runners to be able to come to an event to do an international style Ekiden event if someone was to put that on. It would require so much funding to recruit the athletes, incentivize the athletes, to the event. Not to mention the fact that Hakone Ekiden is really a team event. And these athletes that are competing in this event have been working as a team in training and racing with each other and living with each other in many instances for many months and many years. And so much like a more drawing parallel to the Super Bowl, it's much more of a team thing. Whereas if you tried to put on an international event with professional runners, these runners wouldn't really be a team, right? It would be more like putting a whole lot of really good runners together to compete on that day. Now, one could argue they're going to produce the same result, maybe, because running's not really a team sport. That could potentially be true in some aspects. But I believe that a part of the reason why Hakone Ekiden is so big and so popular is because of this team aspect and the ingrained culture around following a team from the position of the spectator. And as mentioned, in Japan, there's something around the 60 to 70 million, I've heard 50 to 85 mentioned, people watching on TV, and another 1 to 2.5 million people, it was estimated, over 2 million people this year watched it from the streets of Japan. And you can see in these video footage and photos that I'm playing from the very, very talented photographer from Rerun Tokyo. I definitely suggest going to give him a follow. That the crowds are just really thick all throughout the course. It's estimated that over 2 million people are watching. I think I'm really excited about doing more of this in the future because I think this event is really special. I think there was a huge struggle on our side to figure out how to film the actual race day event. I realized as the event became closer and I spoke to more and more marketing managers and people within the sport that the copyright laws around Ekiden itself were very, very strict. So strict, in fact, that you're not really technically allowed to even publish footage that you've shot yourself from the side of the road. Now, I'm going to be honest, I think that's a little bit too strict, as in if you take your own video footage from the side of the road, that's not allowed. I'm not even 100% sure if there's legal grounds for that, but I could be wrong. In Japan, I don't know the legal laws, but I do know that the same thing applies for the Olympics, for example, so I very well may be wrong with that statement, in that you're not allowed to publish video footage of the Olympic Games on a different channel, even from your own camera. There can be consequences for that, so Ekiden may sort of have a similar rule. I argue that I think those rules and those laws are maybe a little bit outdated. I would be more than happy for someone to debate that and for someone to tell me that there's reasons for that, but I think that really trying to keep the broadcast strictly in-house and have it only in Japanese language and only available to Japanese public, I think that's a little bit of a shame, to be honest, because I think there's so many people around the world that would love to watch this event in an English commentary as well. And I believe, especially after spending 2 months in Japan are very, very rule abiding. If there's a rule there, they'll stick to it, regardless of how much it might make sense or not. Now, who am I to question the rules of Ekiden? I just purely think from a standpoint of growing the sport and making something interesting and inspiring, I think it's a little bit limiting to have it in only Japanese language and only available for Japanese people to watch. Now, I've put a strong foot forward to try and be a leader in the space of bringing it more to the rest of the world in English language. I'm not quite sure how far I've gotten, but in this video, we're obviously showing all that we can legally, and maybe even some of these video footages might, the Ekiden event might not really like from our own mobile phones. But I think having seen thousands at this point videos on Twitter and Instagram of people shooting from their mobile phone, that's why I say that I'm not quite sure if that sort of law around filming the event from the side of the road with your own camera is really enforced, or anyone can really do anything about it if you do. Because I think these rules were made well before smartphones, even probably well before cameras were really an easily accessible thing to buy. And I think at some point, especially with the evolution of the internet and technology, rules should change and things should be a little bit more open and unrestrictive. And I personally would love to be involved in this Ekiden event again in the future. And I really hope that there's some openness from the Ekiden management staff to broadcast in English in the future, although I have been told at this point that it's a little bit of a slim chance. I think some other things I learned just quickly before we finish up is there was a little bit of a reluctance from some universities and coaches to share a lot of the training. I found that interesting, and I think it's more of a psychological thing. A lot of the videos we were asked to edit right down and remove a whole lot of scenes, and those scenes were really just coaches talking about specific training methods. I thought that was interesting. I've never really been a believer that training should be super secret, but I do sort of see a side of it to go, well, if we want to create some fear in the competitor's mind, we might want to sort of let them know we're doing some things and rumours about other things. I sort of see that part of it. I know that exists in lots of sports too, that sort of psychological effect. There's quite a lot of that going on in Japan and Ekiden. Many of the universities and corporate teams and high school teams actually denied our request to film, but I hope that now they can see a template of what we're doing, and in the future they'll be more open to having a video shot of them in the lead up to Ekiden. So I'm going to share much more about this reflection on Ekiden podcasts in the near future over on Sweat Elite and on Pro Run News. I really appreciate the images by Rerun. These images are just so beautiful. I really appreciate being able to use them in this video. You are allowed to use images of the event, just not video. Again, a sort of very old traditional rule. And thank you everyone for watching. I really appreciate the support as always. I'm very critical of my own work and believe that this could have been done a lot better. There were some communication errors on our end internally around locations of where we would be, and I think there were some missed opportunities, but at the end of the day I don't think you can ever really properly perfect a piece of art. But I really hope that this is sort of a starting point and something that we can really move forward on in the future and make a lot better. So thank you to Sebastian, thank you to Sakasa, Sushi Man, for helping out with photography. Thank you to Rerun once again for the photos. A huge thank you to the sponsors of this video series. Saw Running, the best running apparel brand in the world, in my opinion. They've been a supporter of ours for a very long time. Huge thank you to Saw. Garmin Running, I've been wearing Garmin for 15 years. I absolutely love the brand, they never fail me. I've been wearing the 965 for a while now and I really enjoy it. Do check out the video series if you want to learn more about that. And HVMN with their ketone IQ supplement that I use every single day. I'm a huge fan of it and I speak about it all the time. If you'd like to learn more about these three sponsors, they're mentioned in more detail at the end of every video we've just shot through Ekiden. But huge thank you to the support, and we're now thinking about what we are going to get up to in 2020.